Hi, everyone. My name's Kurt Chisholm. I'm the founder and CEO of LeaseUp and the host of the Shift podcast. I'm so excited about today's episode where we're featuring Carrie Bobb. Carrie's a former broker and currently the founder and CEO of hellojenny. I love Carrie's product. I love what they're doing in the market. It's so interesting. Their utilization of social media, and they've turned it into a product for commercial real estate. And it's incredible the results they're having. Carrie Bobb is also just such an inspiration. Her story is absolutely incredible, and we get into all of that today and more. So enjoy the episode and welcome to The Shift. Carrie, thanks so much for joining us today on The Shift. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So am I. So great to have you here. So I feel like everyone who's a listener probably knows you already, but tell us about your background. How did you get into real estate?
So my parents, we lived in Arizona, that's where I grew up, had a side hustle of just investing in small like retail pad buildings or some medical office buildings. And they kind of got me into it. And I was trying to get hired at different commercial real estate companies in Phoenix. And I started dabbling, calling people in San Diego. And I got hired by CBRE in San Diego 20 years ago and fell into retail there. And then the rest is history. That's how I fell into it.
And then you're today running hellojenny. Can you talk about hellojenny and what you're doing there?
Yeah. So I was at CBRE until 2018. Then, life happens, had a hard stop. And so it was just looking at the landscape of commercial real estate, and retail is just in my blood. I love retail brands. I love retail real estate. And I was watching social commerce and how many sales are being driven through social platforms for retailers. And I thought, there's got to be a way where brick and mortar retail landlords can drive revenue through social the way retail brands are doing it. And so I was just like noodling on it for a while. And then Asana Partners had called and we were talking about potentially working with them on leasing some assignments. And I said, I've got this theory. Would you be willing to let us test out being a social media company that actually does leasing through social for your property? And they were like, oh yeah, that's great. And that was about 18 months ago now. Wow. And they're still a client, and we're now in about 14 states, and it's crazy how fast it's taken off, but it's been really cool. I've learned a ton, and there's so much money being traded through social that it doesn't totally matter the industry you're in. The strategy is kind of the same. And so that's what hellojenny does.
Can you tell me about when you go into a new market now? It sounds like it's growing so fast. Do you have to like educate other brokers in that market of like, hey, here's how we work, and here's how you're going to interact with us in this market now to do deals in this particular building that we're working with?
Totally. And I would be the same way. I'm 44, and we've been doing our business the same way for a long time. But just to put it into perspective, when I started in retail brokerage, there was no online shopping. So our industry has changed a lot in 20 years. And we've definitely had some brokers that are maybe resistant to us coming in as the social media company because they think, oh, maybe this is a way where they're trying to get the listing or something. And it's not. This is a whole new seat at the table. And I love brokers. My whole career is in brokerage. And we want to help be a conduit for brokers in the social media channels. So like we'll direct message brands and then dish it to the brokers. We're not taking fees or participating in commissions or anything. And the way I explain it to them is like, look, the landlord wants you focusing on the box deals or the really big tenants or the sexy brands. They don't want you taking your time cold calling nail salons or juice shops or some of that low hanging fruit that we could get through social and just help you. So that's kind of, and usually when they understand that, they love us because we're trying to help bring them leads.
Yeah.
And that's been really fun.
And have you started now to like see brokers that had been introduced to you through one of your clients who owns a building, and that broker manages the building? Are they now taking you to other buildings and saying, "Hey, can you help us with this building as well?" And
Yeah,
they're starting to be a channel for distribution. That's what better
yeah,
sign than that to hear that.
yeah. It's really cool. And then what's interesting with that is you can scale it. So we have some clients that we have a portfolio of about 15 properties where they might have a Starbucks and a Target in 7 properties. And so we create content for those brands, but you can use it on different handles and all of that. So I've just learned a lot about scaling that kind of business. And it's a
Yeah.
different kind of business than brokerage, but the strategy is kind of the same. Like building a social media strategy for retail property should align with their retail leasing strategy and who your consumer is, who your target prospective tenants are, and making sure you're hitting all those different categories.
And then if you're trying now to do, if you're working actively with the building and you're working with the broker that's repping the building, are you joining them in like the weekly check-in calls to the landlord when the broker is typically going to have a call with the landlord and say, hey, here's the progress we have, the number of tours, the number of inquiries we're getting from other brokers in the market? Are you joining those, or is that separate? Are you giving them data that they can then provide to the landlord? What does that dynamic look like?
We're not doing the weekly calls, but we'll do about once a month.
Okay.
And we take our cues from the brokers and the leasing team. So if they tell us the tenant categories that they want this shop, the shape that they want the project to take, sometimes we chime in and say, oh, we have a relationship with that tenant, or have you thought about this? It's really collaborative. If we don't feel like they want our input, we won't. Like, we're very respectful of how they run their process, and we're genuinely there just to assist. I've told a few people we don't want to be Michael Jordan, we want to be Scottie Pippen, and we just want to dish to the brokers and let them do the deals and things like that.
Yeah, I love that. I have another question about this. I'm just so fascinated in your business. I think it's so unique, and obviously you're doing something right. You're growing so fast. How do you deal with kind of going and leveraging data? I think there's so much data on the retail side today in terms of where buyers are, demographic information, things like that. Do you have to leverage that with the social media strategy, or do you have to you go about that a little bit of a different way?
That's such a great question. I don't have a really concise answer for you because I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And I'm such a data nerd, and I'm a consumer behavior person at the core, and then it just happens to play in my brokerage business, in the social media business. But when you're running a social media handle, there's so much data for that handle. Like, we've all seen the insights for our personal handles of like the age of our followers and things like that. And so when you're running it for a property, you can see who's interacting with your property, whether they're on site or not, which I think is a really interesting differentiator from geofencing, right?
Yep.
These are people who are engaged and participating, whether they're on property or not. We had one client that was interested in Yeti being a tenant. So we did a Yeti cooler giveaway. We had 3,500 followers, and 5,000 people entered to win this Yeti cooler. Like a 200 Yeti cooler, 5,000 people entered. So we put together some consumer data and made it look like a consumer analytics report, because it is. It's showing them how the consumers are interacting with it. Flipped it to the leasing team for them to pass along. That same property, we did a giveaway with an emerging brand, an apparel company, and I think we had 25 people enter the giveaway. So we were like, okay, this might not be the best tenant to have
Yeah.
at the property, even though we thought it was a cool tenant. I would have had it on my merchandising plan as
Wow.
a broker. But your audience talks to you and they tell you what they like and what they don't like by their engagement. And so that kind of stuff is super interesting. And we're still trying to figure out how you leverage the data in the best way, because it's there and it's really powerful.
Yeah, it's so interesting, so cool as you start to unpack that, right? Talk to me a little bit about the different asset classes. I know you mentioned now, and it makes sense that you're super heavily focused on the retail side. Do you have groups that are coming to you now and say, hey, can you help with office? Can you help with these other different types of assets? Or is it not quite there yet for a number of reasons?
The next asset class that we're right now actively pursuing and talking to is multifamily. We think the same kind of strategies that we're using on retail work on leasing apartments. And so we're
Wow.
actively building out that vertical. We're starting in Florida, although we would participate or work with apartment buildings all over. But that's kind of where we're starting. And I think it works in office. My comment on office, because I get that question a lot, is it would right now we run our spine of our content and then do offshoots through different platforms on Instagram, because that's where most of the retailers are driving revenue and playing, although TikTok is quickly changing that. But so we invest a lot in Instagram because that's where the money is trading and that's where the retailers are doing a lot of business. And we're doing the same on TikTok. But I think on Office, the main platform is LinkedIn, and building true LinkedIn strategies, helping CEOs, the C-suite executives with their personal brand, building out their LinkedIn profile. It's less about the property or the company on LinkedIn, but more about the key people and building out LinkedIn strategies for them. So I think we could do that for people. So that's kind of where my head's at on the different asset classes.
Yeah, so interesting. And I think you made the right call going into multifamily from there. Massive. What a huge market to go to. So that's super exciting that you guys are exploring that.
Thank
I
you.
want to, yeah, absolutely. I want to change gears for a moment. When we'd first gotten connected, I'd heard just about your background a little bit, and you have such just an incredible story of perseverance. I would love if you'd be open to just kind of sharing your story from what it kind of brought you to doing what you're doing today.
For sure. I think so many people right now are in a place of disruption or transition or trying to figure out, do I stay the course or do I pivot or anything like that? I just had a gnarly life experience that caused me to like have a hard stop and then try to figure it out. But I was, it was 2018 and I was at the peak of my career in San Diego leasing a really big project. I did one Paseo in Del Mar and did the leasing out of the ground and was attending ICSC in May. And while I was there, and I was receiving a national award on behalf of CBRE for my work, and while I was there, I was drugged and raped by an executive with the company. And so just everything just screeched to a halt. I was bound by confidentiality because of my employment contract that I had signed in 2003. And over the next 12 months, what transpired was I was just kind of underground. I couldn't talk to anybody. I wasn't doing anything. I was just driving my kids to school and going through this legal case. But what I learned was 60 million Americans had an arbitration clause in their employment contract, which meant that if should anything bad happen to you in the workplace, you couldn't sue your employer and you were bound by confidentiality before anything bad happened. And because I was earning so much money that year, which I was earning more than I had ever earned before, I could afford to like take a beat, figure out what are we doing, where are we going. And in November of 2018, Google had a worldwide walkout where 20,000 employees walked off the job. And the New York Times printed an article, and it was all in regard to arbitration for sexual assault in the workplace. And there had been a executive that had gotten like a $90 million severance or parachute payout or something. And my sister, who's a Marine and an attorney, called me that morning. She's like, "This is what your case is about. This is what they're talking about. This arbitration." And the employees the New York Times printed the demand list of those employees, and she's like, "This is your case. Like I told you, we would know it when we see it. This is what you need to fight for." So I ended up not taking any money for confidentiality, and I negotiated out of arbitration and had the right to tell my story and talk about what happened. And it just sounds crazy. I cannot believe that this all happened. So we settle out in May of 2019, and that summer I lobbied Congress. And lobbying Congress sounds so big. It is, but I was just this one little person that had like one contact, and I flew out there and told my story and just said, a lot of people can't afford to not take confidentiality, and we have to know and employers need to understand that they're hiring people that are risky. And then that one contact that I had in Congress introduced me to other people, and then other people And then they introduced a bill called Carrie's Law. And then in February of this year, a larger bill was passed that has all of the Carrie's Law components in it. So it has been a trip, a wild ride. And I like even retelling it, it's like, I cannot believe that all of this happened. But yeah, that was my story.
It's so incredible. I mean, and truly, Carrie, I think you changed the world, right? By standing up and fighting through it. It must have been so difficult to have fighting through it. I can't even imagine, but you did. You changed the world. There's a law named after you because of that, and how many people have you helped because of it? So just like so profound. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And
It's hard, and when we're in those places where you feel like nobody sees you, like I did not think for a second any of that was going to happen. But in those moments, I was just kind of like, okay, I've got to at least try, because I don't want to look back and wish I had tried a little bit harder. And I think, especially with everything that's happening in the world right now, there's a lot of people trying to figure out, what do I do with my career? What do I do with my business? Like, where's the current going, right? And like, how do we ride that current and navigate it? And I think just those little steps to be brave and do the thing that we're scared to do, we don't want to do it. But if we looked back and not regretting, don't like just having no regrets about just taking one little step, because no one wants to take that big leap. Like, I never in a million years thought I would lobby Congress. That all sounds so big.
right.
But in those little steps and in those little moments, you can get there.
Right. And I think like there's something to be said for, just understanding that the fear, the pain of failure is not nearly as bad as the pain of regret. Right. And I think making
Yes.
decisions that minimize your regrets in life is a good mental model to kind of think through a little bit. Right. So, and
Yeah.
you now have taken your experiences and you are talking now and leveraging those experiences to teach others about things like crisis management and things like that as well. Can you talk about some of the things you're doing along those lines today?
Yeah. So at the CREI Summit in September, I'm teaching a little workshop on crisis management, and it was spurred out of a clubhouse I was doing about a year ago. And someone had said, I was on a panel and I wasn't the main speaker, but someone had said, I'm going through a divorce. It's really painful. All of my followers on social media know that I've gone through a divorce and I need to address it. How do I address it? And like, I couldn't hit that unmute button fast enough. And I was just like, first of all, you don't owe anybody anything, and don't worry about it. It's totally fine. And talking about these gnarly subjects is really, really tricky. And one of the things I learned was, so I didn't talk about what had happened to me until the bill was introduced, because I didn't
Wow.
want to be known for that. Like, I just thought very few people can navigate it well where it's not a stigma. And I was really freaked out that that's what it was going to be. And then when the bill was introduced, it was like, well, I don't have a choice anymore. Like, this is where it's all going. So when I knew the bill was coming, I hired a media trainer in LA, and I was living in San Diego at the time. So I would drive back and forth to LA, and she is on, she's on TV. And so I would have to go up really late, and we would train till like 2 a.m. And there were a few times where, there's one time in particular where I was telling my story and she goes, "You sound angry, do it again." And I threw my papers down and I go, "I am angry." And we were arguing, and she goes, "If you sound angry, they will never hear what you have to say."
Interesting.
And it stopped me. And she goes, "Carrie, you have to say this so much to me that when you get in front of a camera or you get on a public platform, you're just telling a story. It's not this like personal, I'm seeking validation or I'm seeking something out of a response. Like, the way you talk about it, it doesn't matter what people think or say. You're just telling a story." And so I tell her that she's like my Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off. So she was like, "Say it again." And so I was there till like 2 a.m. that night, just saying it again, to where I'm on a podcast with you and it's like, it's okay. We can talk about it. And so I think when people are going through something that's really gnarly, they need to prepare talking about it or writing about it to where we're not seeking anything out of a response from people. And I think a really good barometer is we're 100% talking about it to help somebody else, not because we're seeking something through it, but that because this is out there, hopefully somebody else can avoid it or somebody else can navigate through it quicker than we did. If we're looking for anything else, there's a whole lot of cracks in there where things could go really wrong.
Yeah, I love that. And what a beautiful thing to be able to provide to someone, like to be able to provide knowledge to someone and give someone the ability to learn something from that. It's a beautiful gift to be able to give. So that's incredible as well. Um,
Thank you.
the first, yeah, absolutely. The first 20 episodes of The Shift here, we're talking about women leaders in this industry. It's something that I think that there is a significant issue when it comes to diversity and inclusion in the commercial real estate industry, obviously. And the thing that gets me excited is that I've seen women and people of color, minorities, start to have a larger voice in this market. And it's something that I have said in this podcast before, where getting a diversity of voices into the issues that are facing this industry are actually going to be what drives innovation. And that's, I think, something that the industry actually desperately needs over the coming years. So my question to you, and being someone who's kind of at the forefront of being one of those voices, is kind of twofold. One, what advice would you give to those people who are just starting to try to get into this industry or trying to get more involved, that are from minority groups, women, people of color, and things like that? What advice would you give them? And then, are you doing anything today with groups that you'd recommend they kind of look to and things like that they should get involved with?
So I would say if you're hitting roadblocks and you're trying to figure out how to navigate some of those things, find people in the industry who are like you or have that, whatever it is that makes you different, because you can find people a lot easier now through social media than 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And more often than not, especially if it's a really small group, they have a nucleus group of people that stick together, probably around the country, that if you, and they will introduce you to their other friends and they will have really good advice for how to navigate some of those things. And like, there's just really cool people that are really inclusive. Like you and I were talking about Marissa from Ozo before hopping on the podcast, and Marissa's amazing. She just started pinging different people, and then she's pulled together this amazing group of diverse women that all work together and help each other. And we were at the Globe Street event in Park City, and there was another woman there who was navigating through the crowd, and she wasn't there with anybody. And immediately the group just took her under their wing, and it was just really cool to see everyone kind of sticking together. And it's not in an exclusive way. I think that's really important. I think that's a red flag now if people see exclusivity with different kinds of groups that are promoting diversity. So people are, the right kinds of people are pulling other people in and will be helpful. I get people reaching out to me that have had similar experiences or rough experiences, and I intuitively know who to navigate them to. And so I think finding people who have had similar challenges will know how to navigate the course or wherever people are trying to go in their career. Was that helpful? Or
I think absolutely, right. Just being proactive, and it sounds like, right, and finding the people who you can make your tribe with. That makes a ton of
yes,
sense.
yeah,
Absolutely.
that's right. You got to find your tribe.
So yeah, absolutely. I want to come back to hellojenny because I think that your business is really cool. Talk about, I mean, you're kind of painting the future of, I think, what marketing will be in commercial real estate. Can you kind of talk about what you think this market's going to look like in the coming years from like the marketing side of things, but then just generally as well, what you think the brokerage industry is going to shape to be in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're following retail where the money is going. It's social commerce, and social commerce is expected to grow 3 times faster than e-commerce. And
Wow.
money being spent through social media apps is supposed to hit 1.25 trillion by 2025. So that's a lot of money being spent in a year on social media apps. And so I'm just, because of my nature in retail, I'm watching what the retailers are doing. And I think we're going to be doing the same thing. We're just a little behind. And basically, Gen Z prefers looking things up on TikTok. This I thought was so fascinating because when they're researching a product or a brand or anything, they want to see it and how it works rather than read about it. Whereas I don't mind, I probably prefer like reading a quick blog or reading a quick instruction, like how you
Yeah.
do something. They want to see it. So they want to see it on TikTok. And so I think we're going to be not as boring in our commercial real estate marketing. And when we're leasing assets or selling assets, it's not just going to be a picture of a building, but it's going to be how you feel when you're on property and all the different things that make this property cool. And oh, by the way, if you're interested in leasing it, it's da 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 da. And so I think it's just helping educate our industry on tact, how the platforms work and how you communicate on those platforms, because we've been so siloed in how our industry works for so long that the world has kind of passed us by on these social platforms and how money is being traded, that we have to quickly catch up. And we're doing it, but we have to change our language and how we talk about our properties.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It was a really famous book in the startup world, in the tech world, called Crossing the Chasm. And it's really all about adoption and how different
Mm-hmm.
groups adopt technology in different ways. And the early adopters will want to get in there and tinker, and they want things to break because they want to try things out and they want to be in the forefront of tech and think it's cool. The rest of the bell curve, and that's the chasm that you have to go through from early adopters into early majority and late majority and laggard. But the rest of the bell curve looks to the early adopters to say, okay, what are they doing? What do they get out of this? Is this really a good technology for us? And that my ears immediately go up when you start talking about Gen Z. When they're going on TikTok, they want to see it, but also they can
Right.
swipe through and see the early adopters of that brand. What are they doing? Are these people that I want to
Mm-hmm.
identify with? Right. That's really really interesting. You might shout out to Carrie. You might see a TikTok story from Lease now coming up or something. To people talking about
Yes.
Lease and Lease products. We'll see. I got a marketing meeting after this. I'm going to talk about it. I'll give you full
I
credit. I'll
love
give you full credit.
it. I mean, that's
That's
where it's
awesome.
all going, right? And
Yeah.
so we've just got to figure it out. And it's kind of fun to learn how to do something new. It's frustrating, it can be challenging, but it's wide open ocean. And TikTok, for sure, we're still in the early adapter stage for commercial real estate. Like, there's plenty of
Yeah.
space out there.
Yeah, I'd argue we're still almost in early stages for basically every form of social, except for maybe LinkedIn. But like, it's still pretty
True.
early,
It is.
in general.
Yeah.
Tell me about for talk about the kind of the broker perspective. Talk to me about how you think the tenant's experience is going to change in commercial real estate in the coming years.
I think the really class A retail properties, and honestly, mixed use properties for sure, have got to be providing things on social. Like in a triple net budget, we used to say there's a marketing budget and we'll put you on the website and you'll be in the coupon clipper or whatever. No big deal now. You need to show that we're promoting you, we're making reels, we're getting this many views. I mean, some of the really sophisticated properties, they're communicating to their tenants like, these are how many views we're getting, this is how many non-followers we're getting to participate on our social platforms each month. And the retailers understand those engagement rates way better than like commercial real estate does. So we've got to get fluent in that language. And it matters on like grocery anchored centers or maybe not as sexy centers. Retailers want to know that the landlord is helping them drive traffic. And you might argue, if it's a small center or if it's maybe a class B retail, why does it have to have a social media handle? But if this is how people are looking up information, it would be the equivalent of not having a website. Like, you want to at least have a place where people can find you. And maybe it's not super sexy or all the bells and whistles, but you need to have the fundamental basic information for how people can find you in the community or lease space from you.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I think that I was talking with a friend of mine about this the other day. WeWork made a brand in real estate, and people know the WeWork product and the WeWork brand. A real estate owner has never built a brand like that. And I think there's an opportunity for that. And you can imagine the power if they built a brand that was significant enough, the following significant enough, the flight to quality that retailers would go through. They'd be like, this is going to add 15% to our gross sales just by being a part and attached to this brand. I mean, there's something there that is completely untapped, I think. Super powerful.
Oh, and they know it intuitively. All they have to do is look at the Instagram handle and they can tell like that if a landlord knows what they're talking about or if they're faking, because they know all the things that you just said.
Fascinating. Absolutely incredible. All right. Well, this is a great place for us to wrap the conversation, Carrie. Thank you so much. It was so awesome to have you on. I really appreciate it. Look forward to CREI coming up, and then hopefully we'll get you back on the podcast someday.
You are the best. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.